So I'm Dr. Paula San Martin. Some of you know me. I teach at the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures. I'm an associate professor, and my area of specialization is Black literatures in the Americas. And here I teach Afro-Caribbean and Spanish American literature. And I became the advisor of this new group, APCE, Asociación para la Promoción de las Culturas en Español, Association for the Promotion of Spanish-Speaking Cultures. Already a couple of years ago, two of my students, Giovanna and Yvette, came to me with ideas, right? That they wanted to have an organization that promoted Spanish-speaking cultures to the whole campus. So the events could be either in English or bilingual, or so that people from different departments, not just in the Spanish section in MCLN, will have access and will know more about these cultures. Thank you. Dr. Sara Cooper.
Especially glad that you're here, because even for liberal arts education in the United States, there's been really kind of a block around Cuba. I don't know how many of you have read about Cuba. Yeah, zero, right?
The ones in my class have read something, right?
So I find that because of the history of we have an embargo on Cuba, and there are certain people, entire populations that are very much anti-Castro, against the regime that's been in Cuba since 1959. There's really a lot of propaganda against Cuba. So I'm kind of wanting to know, what have you heard about Cuba, or what do you think? When you think Cuba, what do you think of?
Revolution.
The revolution, yeah. Absolutely.
Fidel Castro.
Fidel Castro, that's right. And what do you think about Fidel Castro?
Hating the United States.
Yeah. And some of my projects have been about comics. Some political comics and some just comics that make fun of things. And I looked at the comics that were anti-United States. What else have you heard about Cuba?
Censorship.
Yeah, there's an idea that there's complete censorship in Cuba. What else have you heard?
Good coffee.
Oh. Yeah, cafecito. So they don't consider what we drink here to be coffee. They call it cafe americano or colored water. You go there and what you have, you drink little shots of coffee all day long. And it's so thick and dark and delicious. But very strong, very strong. You have to either, I put milk in mine because I don't like to drink sugar in my coffee, or else you put a ton of sugar. Anyway, what I really wanted to bring to people's consciousness is how little information there is about Cuba, and the information that we get is often tainted or swayed toward the negative. And that's not by accident. That is part of a pretty concerted plan, and really it all stems from the revolution, because revolution was popular with pretty much everybody in Cuba, of the working class and the poor class, and anyone who did not consider themselves as white, and not very popular with the people who were rich and had various estates and lots of land, because after the revolution you're only allowed one estate. You weren't allowed to have all the land. Land was parceled out to everybody who was working the land. And at that time, the United States owned 85% of shipping, railroads, production, coastal property, and that was all taken away from the owners that lived in the United States and other foreign countries. And so there's a lot of bad blood. And that's why there's still resentment. That was in 1959, Was anyone in this entire room alive in 1959? No, this has been going on a long time. And the embargo was supposed to cripple the government in Cuba. It has never crippled the government, although it has made life a lot harder for irregular Cubans. So that's why Dr. San Martin mentioned that it's hard to get books here from Cuban writers. Can't just import things from Cuba because it's literally illegal for United States citizens to pay money, to give money, or spend money with the Cuban government. And since it's a socialized system of government in Cuba, the government literally backs all of the businesses, or at least has until the last 20 years. So, a book is published in Cuba, the backing all comes from the Cuban government. So, no import-export. I mean, seriously, especially, I am a specialist in women's literature, and looking at the enormous popularity and interest in women's literature over the last, now I can say 30 years at least, the idea that there were no women from Cuba who are writing is preposterous. It's ridiculous. Women have been speaking up and being listened to quite a bit, increasingly. So, and I came to find out that indeed women were writing. And since it's my specialty, and women were the ones who were most suffering from this blockade, that's where I went. Well, and it's also because of how I started was meeting a woman writer. So I'm just going to tell you what the outline of the presentation is. We're going to talk about how the press was established. I'm going to introduce the editorial board, the translators, the authors, the books that we have published so far, the nuts and bolts of running a nonprofit press, volunteers and interns, what has been their role, and then if you can't read down there, but if you could, you'd know it was how political changes affect Cubanabooks. Educated young minds. How many of you are bilingual? Many. How many of you have at least some of a second language? Okay, well, educated people who are ready to learn about other cultures are going to be really important, especially if you're interested in Cuba. It's going to be a huge new market. And if you're bilingual, that's even better, because you're going to be part of this next generation of workers, professionals who are able to travel freely back and forth. So yeah, we will definitely get to that. I started off by reading about publishing, printing, marketing. I met with mentors, people. I knew the founder and director of Cleus Press, and I knew the director of a small university press, and I knew somebody else who was self-publishing, so I was talking to all of these people, and I realized, this is going to be a little complicated. I didn't realize that there were so many aspects to getting a book published, especially just a self-published, because, well, you know, you have to find a printer who will print your book at a fair cost, and then you have to find out where you're going to keep all of these books and how they're going to be distributed. Or, you know, am I going to keep them in my home, big piles of books, and I'm going to be the one who has to send them out all the time, and how am I going to get the word out about the books, and well, how do you even put a book together? Do you just put it in Microsoft Word and print it off from there? Well, no, you don't. There's special programs to put together books, and I just kept on finding more and more. You have to work with the Library of Congress to get at least a control number, if not a cataloging in publication number. You have to get ISBNs. I don't know if you've ever noticed on the back of books, there's a really long number, and that's a particular locator number. You have to sign up at and buy ISBNs. You have to buy a barcode for every book. You have to start a bank account and get into PayPal. I had to start a PayPal account. I didn't know anything about these things. I had to get a business license in order to actually publish and sell books. I had to research how to write a contract and figure out what the contract would be like. What did I want the terms to be for the authors, for the press, for the translators? I had to find translators. I thought, well, if I'm gonna do a book, it's got to look good. So how do I figure out what the cover's going to look like and the text design, and then how do I get the word out? Website and have a blog and a Facebook page, and then God, how am I going to get people to go to the website and the blog and the Facebook page? You have to reach out to libraries and bookstores and reviewers and professors and journalists, and then, well, it was so complicated and so much work. Like, I'm going to do all of this for one book? Huh? By God, I'm a woman of action. If I can do one book, I can start a press, and we can publish more authors. And I floated this idea by Mirtha, and she was so excited. Yes, absolutely. The women here would be crazy about this. I'll introduce you to everybody who's anybody, and we'll pick out the exact right books, and this is going to be great. And I thought, well, I can't do that all by myself, and so I'm going to have an editorial board. And well, again, wow, how naive was I? I thought, oh, sure, I'll just start a press. I have a full-time job, plus research, but no problem. I'm going to start a new business and be the main contact with dozens of people in Cuba and dozens of people in the United States and people in Spain and Mexico, and oh, it's crazy. Travel back and forth, both us going to Cuba and Cuban authors being allowed to come to the United States. First, recently, the Cuban government made it painless. It was decided that any Cuban who wanted to travel to the United States would be allowed. They didn't have to worry about getting permission from the Cuban government anymore. But there was quite a long time where they did. The hard thing is to get a visa from the United States government to allow them to come to the United States. We're having our major Latin American Studies conference at the end of May. There are, I think, 250 or 300 Cubans, academics, writers, and such, who have applied for visas. As of last week, only 40 had received a reply. We're at the end of April. They can't book a plane flight. They can't do anything until they have that visa. So that's problematic. Communications, I've already mentioned. Not everybody has it. Women writers, Cubana. Cubana in itself, the A, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, the A means female, right? So Cubana would be a Cuban woman. Cubanabooks. Yes.
Okay. Now that you mentioned about like Cubana, what about in the future? Are you think about publishing about men or the other genders? Like,
I have been approached about what I publish, for instance, somebody who is transgender, like whether that be M to F or F to M, or somebody who did not identify as either gender. And so that's something that the editorial board and our new executive board will have to discuss.
oh, okay.
So
not just women.
Right. Well, we don't know, because right now we don't have enough money to just to do this, or time to just do women. So then we open it up. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see if we're going to expand, if we're going to turn it over to other presses. Who knows? Yes.
I mean, there's so much literature out there. Why Cuban writers?
Because Cuba is so interesting. It's so different from any other Latin American country. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that this afternoon, but Cuba had this amazing close relationship with the United States, really super close, so that Cuba was like kind of a mini United States. In the United States, a lot of people wanted to annex Cuba up until the Cuban Revolution, right? We actually literally had possession of Cuba for a while at the turn of the century. And then the revolution happened, and so everything was different. The morals and ethics of a whole people were different. Women were supposed to enter the workforce and be strong and do whatever they wanted. Again, very similar to the United States, but in a very Latin American way. And Cuba is fascinating with its hybrid culture. You get a tiny bit of indigenous, a lot of Spanish, a lot of African, and a lot of United States influence. It's just such an interesting mix. And I find people in Cuba to be exceedingly highly educated and willing to speak the truth. And I think that that is an excellent combination. If you're naive and you just believe you can do it, you probably can. Don't let anybody tell you it's impossible.
Okay, we want to thank Dr.